When we validate, we can validate the emotion, the intention, the desire, and we don't have to endorse the behavior. So what that looks like is, back to my blue cup, I can see that you're very upset about the blue cup. Now here's the key word, and, not but. So the minute we say but, we have just negated all of the lovely validation that we've just given. So we use an and. I see that the blue cup is really important to you, and tonight you've got red. You decide.
Our guest today is Gabriele Nicolet, a toddler whisperer, parent coach, and speech therapist who for 15 years owned Speech Kids, a private speech therapy practice in the DC metro area. She's a co-founder of Raising Orchid Kids, an online global parent education and coaching practice. And she hosts the Complicated Kids podcast, focused on such topics as child development, parenting tips, raising quirky learners, and much more.
Thank you very much for being here. We really appreciate it. How are you doing today?
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
We were just talking, we've talked previously and a little bit before I hit the record button. You have an impressive background and experience in a wide range of topics and specialties, from speech to parent consultations. Today, we're just going to focus on a little piece of that I think our listeners would be very interested in hearing, and give them some good actionable information and tips after they finish this episode to improve maybe their relationships with their kids or spouse or whoever. So we're going to talk about validation today. Maybe you just want to start off by just telling us, what is validation?
Yeah, validation is the unadulterated giving of acceptance to someone else's perspective. It comes without conditions. It comes without yeah buts. It is a full acknowledgement of, I hear or I see that you feel this way. And the reason it's so powerful is not because we're giving away anything, because we're not actually giving away anything. We can think that person is wrong. We can think that person is misguided, that they are cuckoo. And yet it costs us nothing to say, again, wow, that's something you're feeling. We don't have to agree, is my point.
So why does that matter in conversation? And on a related note, I was going to ask you, why don't people do this naturally? Like, what are the hangups, or what keep us from validating? Well, you can talk about this.
Yeah, we would rather be right than connected. I think is really what's going on, right? Like, our poor little egos want us to be the best, the rightest, the most, the everythingest, and particularly as it comes with parenting, right? Like, we would really like to believe that the small person standing in front of us or throwing themselves on the floor in front of us just doesn't know as much as we do, and that we are the owners of all the expertise and all of the knowledge, and they should stand, and while we download all of our knowledge to them, and say, thank you, mother, thank you, father, for this information. And quite frankly, that's just not how it works, number one. And if you're a parent, you know that's not how it works. And yet we keep trying to do that. And so it gets a little wonky. And so in the interest of being the teacher, the correct one, we forget, and it's not intentional, and it's not malintended, right? We don't have any bad intent here, but we forget that the 4-year-old, that the 2-year-old, that the baby, that the 7-year-old has a perspective, and they also want to be right, and they want to be the most and the best. And the fact that they're not in air quotes, right, is kind of irrelevant, especially to them.
So you work with kids of all ages and their parents, or mostly with their parents?
Mostly with parents, also some kids. Yeah, when I feel like we need to work all together, there are some times when I'll go into the home and kind of model some things for parents so that they can see how that's working. But yeah, mostly parents at this point.
Are there any examples or behaviors or situations that you hear time and time again from the parents that you're working with that kind of illustrate what sorts of, when they might try to be right versus when just validating the child might be more helpful? Is there anything that sticks out that you could share?
Yeah. The one about the blue cup where your toddler is sitting down in their chair and you give them a cup of water and they scream at you because they wanted the blue cup, not the red cup that you just gave them. And the reason I always like to choose this example is because it seems so silly and really inconsequential. And yet in that moment for that toddler, it is the most consequential thing there is. Like, I must have the blue cup. I can't have the red cup. So people want to jump to the part where we're like, but we can't give them the blue cup because it will spoil the kid. But leaving that aside for a second, stay with the part where it's very upsetting for you, child of mine, that I just gave you the red cup. That's the validation part. It's not an endorsement of their behavior. In other words, we can still, talk about how we don't scream at mommy, fine, whatever. But we got to validate first. Because number one, when we validate first, that person feels heard. When somebody feels heard, they're much less likely to be on the defensive, to want to prove that they're right. So it's like a total diffusion technique that's, again, it costs us nothing, right? Like it actually doesn't do any harm, and it will do a lot of good to say, it's very upsetting to you that I gave you the red cup instead of the blue one. You really want the blue one. And now people are still thinking, yeah, but. I know, I can hear the audience. So let's go to the next part, which is then you have an opportunity as a parent to decide what it is that you're going to do. So are you going to say, I know that you want the blue cup, but the blue cup is dirty and you've got red or nothing? And often when you validated, now kiddo can hear you when you're offering the choices, right? Because everybody talks about offer choices. Okay, yeah, offer choices, but like get on their side first so that they're not pulling on the rope here, on the cup rope. Or you say, you know what, you've had a really rough day. So one parent is traveling. I'm fried too. I don't have it in me to go to the mat for this stupid cup. I would be happy to fish your blue cup out of the dishwasher and wash it for you. Or you like blue so much, I went ahead and got you 10 blue cups and I'm throwing away the red cups. Now, if you do that, know that your child tomorrow will choose red. So don't buy 10 blue cups, but maybe you do have 4 or 5, right? Like, again, what you do doesn't matter nearly as much as the feeling and the emotion from which you do it. Because if you're fed up, you're going to give fed up energy to your kid. And if you're calm and you're like, wow, this is really hard for you, then you're giving compassionate energy and everything goes a lot better.
So by validating, the child feels heard, and then that removes the reflex to be defensive. Yeah. And does that change their behavior immediately, or does it just set the conversation up for more solution-focused conversation?
Yeah. Sometimes it does actually change their behavior. Probably mostly depends on the age of the kid, right, and how developed their executive function is. But it's probably most of the time it won't change their immediate behavior. They're still going to think that the blue cup is the most important thing. But again, once you've acknowledged, once you've validated, you've given something, and now you can again decide how we're gonna proceed. But I would say, like, if that's an argument that you're having over and over and over and over again, try the validation first. If you're validating and still having this argument all the time, then that's a signal that, like, nervous system is activated. We want to look a little bit deeper. We want to understand why. Why is this so upsetting? Well, he's just spoiled. No, kids are not spoiled. Kids have ideas and needs, and some kids have needs and ideas that are a little bit fixed. And the way to break those apart is not by having the same argument over and over again. Like, we want to understand why.
Yeah.
So I think, if when parents are in conflict over time, we really want to dig deeper and kind of get to be like, okay, why is this happening? What's going on underneath? Can we address some of those things so that this isn't happening all the time? Everybody just doesn't feel miserable all the time.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, as adults, I think we probably, whether teachers, parents, whatever, forget that these kids have their own ideas about what they want to, and maybe we get busy, or where it's a safety issue, or we just have a habit of doing something a certain way, or like you said, we just want to be right. That it's almost instinctive, our response to that. But we're going to get into some, I think you're going to share some different ways that listeners can start practice validating even today. But it sounds like this is really about changing your own behavior. So while there may be behavioral improvements in the child, you're not changing them, you're just changing how you respond.
Yeah, so the bad news about humans is we cannot control anyone else's behavior. And so we kind of know that when it comes to like our sisters-in-law, or like my friend who's always late, we kind of know that, and yet we wish we could. And then when we have kids, we're like, oh, they're so small and malleable, and they're from me. And so I must be able to control these little small people because they reflect on me. And when they behave well, then I look like a good parent. When they behave poorly, then I look like a terrible parent, and I feel like a terrible parent. Just all this stuff is wrapped up in there. It's crazy town. Like, it's really part of the reason my podcast is called the Complicated Kids Podcast is because it's so complicated. We're like, oh my God, what are we doing? But now I forgot the original question. Sorry, Andrew.
Well, no, so it sounds like you're working with parents they're working on themselves. They're improving what they do. It's not about working on improving the child. They're changing themselves and how they interact with the child, and that then carries forward into their behavior and how their self-worth.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And so once we realize that, like, oh, actually, I'm not controlling my child's behavior. They're controlling their behavior on my behalf, for example. Like, mommy really doesn't like it when and if they're able to do that, that's one thing. And there are some kids who are able to like hold it together in a restaurant, for example. And there are some kids who really aren't able to do that, in which case we either need to, we have a couple of different choices. One is we can manage our own minds and be like, okay, well, I really want to go out to dinner and I'm willing to pay the price of a child who's screaming in the restaurant. Or I don't take that child to dinner. And I'm not mad about either one, because I know that my child is going to do what my child does, and I get to control myself. And listen, we are the ones, the adults are the ones with the fully cooked brains. So we do have to, we don't have to actually, but we get to leverage our skills in service of our children's brains that are developing, but they're not going to learn today, the things that we want them to know over time. It's a process.
Sure. And I guess what you're explaining applies to all relationships, doesn't it? I mean, what we can't control and what we really can't control anybody else. Yeah. Is this a difficult mindset shift for parents, or do you find that most parents, they agree, they understand, and that it's more the practice or application that's challenging?
That's such a good question. I think it runs the gamut. I think that it gets complicated further by all of the parenting methodologies that are out there. And lots of parents right now, anyway, have been like with this gentle parenting thing. And I think what parents take from the gentle parenting, whatever it's called, whatever you want to call it, movement, is the part where we validate, but they leave off the part where we actually do establish boundaries for kids. and we do assert our adult parameters around situations to keep kids safe and healthy, for example, to let them grow in a right-sized container, where they can feel both that they have enough freedom but also enough constraint. So I think parents come at this kind of overriding their own intuition in many ways because of they've seen things on social media or they've read things in books. And so when they come to me for coaching, they feel really awful because they feel like they're doing everything wrong, that their child is behaving badly, and they don't know what to do about it. And then as we go through the process of kind of understanding why kiddo is behaving the way kiddo is behaving, and then why they're behaving the way they're behaving, and who's in control of what, and we bring some awareness to that, now we've got like even if nothing else changes, everything changes because everybody's just kind of more understanding, the adults mostly are more understanding of what's happening. And they're able to make some choices that are going to help rather than hinder a process of helping a child regulate, for example.
Let's get into some practical examples. I have two questions that I wanted to ask you, and I'm not sure which order to ask these in. The first is, I was hoping you could share just a handful of approaches or tips or mindsets that listeners can use right away. But I also wanted to ask you if there's any kind of like trigger words or actions that are the opposite of validation, that anybody who's listening to this might think, oh yeah, I do that. Maybe that's something I want to stop doing. Or maybe it's more important just to focus on what you are doing versus what you're not doing. I don't know, but those are the two questions. So whichever order you wanted to take this conversation with those questions, go for it.
Yeah, actually, it's a great one, and I'll combine them. When we validate, we can validate the emotion, the intention, the desire, and we don't have to endorse the behavior. So what that looks like is, back to my blue cup, I can see that you're very upset about the blue cup. Now, here's the key word, and, not but. So the minute we say but, we have just negated all of the lovely validation that we've just given. So we use an and. I see that the blue cup is really important to you, and tonight you've got red. You decide. And you can hear in my voice, like I actually have this very calm place that I can get to because I've practiced it so much with people I work with and with kids, that parents don't always have. So you have to kind of mess with the physiology. You got to like find your calm place, because you don't have to be mad that they're upset about the cup. They're just upset about the cup. It's fine. They're allowed to be upset about the cup. And I don't have to prostrate myself at the altar of my child's every whim, right? If I decide that actually it's the red one tonight. So that and is hugely important. So that's one thing I would say.
Let me ask you a follow-up to that. I'm guessing there's a right way and a not so right way to do this. So the words validating and then using and, but what kinds of specific words do you recommend parents use? What sort of voice tone, body language? Because it's not you want to be empathetic about it, right? And genuine about it. So
Yes.
I would imagine if you do it the wrong way, it doesn't come across with the same, the authenticity.
Yeah, that's such a good point, actually, because, right, what you don't want to do is come in with like, I know better than you how you feel, because that's a sure trigger for kiddos, right? They want to be the experts in how they feel. And in fact, they are the experts in how they feel. So one of the things you can do to soften what I just said is, it looks like you might be. And again, you know your kid best. So parents are going to know like what words are going to trip them up. Like there are kids who, if you say anything like that, it looks like you might be a little upset. No, I'm not. And so that's fine. You can still validate by saying something like, looks like this isn't going the way either of us intended, for example. Or looks like You have some strong feelings about this, but you're right, Andrew, in terms of like very neutral, very open energy. And a friend of mine pointed out recently, I lead by example. So if you listen to the tone of my voice, I have shifted my affect significantly in this portion of the conversation to demonstrate this. So like if you're at all in tune with like your own physical reactions, you'll be responding to this. Like it feels more relaxed, more open. For me, it happens kind of in my lower belly. I'm like, oh, okay, good. I feel better. I feel more grounded. I feel whatever. So you definitely, as a parent, particularly of young children, but really of all kids, I mean, all people, right? We're constantly exchanging two modes of communication, at least. One is the verbal, but the other is the energetic, right? In the form of body language, in the form of affect, in the form of like vocal tone and prosody, and like how we say what we say matters more than the words. So yeah, if you can't get away from the tension that you feel about like just use the red cup, if you can't get out of that, and did you like, I don't know if you felt that, but like tension in my neck, tension in my voice, closing, constriction. If you can't get to openness with this, the validation is not going to land. And that's okay. You'll figure it out. It's fine.
I know somebody who's listening to this tonight they'll have an interaction with their child and they're going to be thinking about what you've said and trying to remember what it is they're supposed to do in the moment. Are there some quick, like, just take a deep breath, is this kind of what you're saying? Just work on bringing your voice down and don't try to come up with a solution. Just reciprocate what you're hearing from your child. And one of the statements that you made was really interesting. I think you said, it seems like you're upset about, or I can't remember what it was you said, but it seemed as if you were rephrasing or describing the behavior in a way that was not really assumptive. You weren't really assuming what they were feeling. You were just kind of stating the fact, like you are, upset. I can't remember exactly how you described that, but it seemed different.
It seems like this isn't going the way you thought, something like that.
I think that's what.
There are lots of kids who, again, they get quite annoyed if you put emotions into their mouths or like ascribe emotion to them. Some kids really like that because they're like, oh yeah, I was totally feeling that way. But I think that the less assumptive, as you say, we can be, and the more descriptive we can be, the better off we are. And the more space we allow for our kids to show us what it is that they're feeling. Which again, we definitely want to use those words. We definitely want to educate them about the range of possible emotions and actions and things. And know that they're learning, right? And they're learning. I think the other thing that we forget is that unpleasant emotions are very unpleasant. And the reason I say it like that is because we're not particularly good as adults at feeling our own negative emotions. So when we feel stressed about something not going the way we wanted, we're ill-equipped, many of us, to process that feeling and to understand like, oh, I'm really disappointed that the meeting didn't go the way I wanted. We're more likely to blame and shame ourselves or others. So now bring it back to the toddler in the chair, right? Who's experiencing a tough emotion that we're very uncomfortable with. And I think that's another reason that I didn't mention earlier that validation feels so hard. It's because we're so triggered by their emotion that we're like, we just need this to stop. Like, I just want you to stop so that I don't have to feel so terrible. But you're right, in terms of like, it's not a problem that we need to solve. A feeling is not a problem to be solved.
Yeah.
Feeling is just a feeling.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So you're really viewing yourself as separate from this other person. You're working on bringing yourself down. You're not trying to fix the other person. You're not trying to prove to them, your child in this case, you're not trying to prove to them that you're right and that they're wrong or that you're a good parent. all you're doing is reflecting back what you hear or see from them in a kind of a factual way, or just what you're observing without putting too much assumptions into it. And then you're just controlling your body language and trying to bring the tone of the conversation down.
Yeah. And that, by the way, is co-regulation, which is another buzzword that gets thrown around. Right? But that's leveraging your nervous system in service of, in this case, your child's nervous system. And when that happens, you create a virtuous cycle of regulation instead of feeding a vicious cycle of dysregulation.
Yeah, I bet every parent knows exactly what you're talking about. Are there any other tips or strategies that you wanted to share in terms of how to validate? Again, tonight, if a parent is sitting across the dining table or in the living room with their child and they can feel it ramping up, is there anything else that you can recommend, or does that kind of capture it? And if so, what are some things that parents should, and I think you've kind of answered this, but just to clarify, some things that parents shouldn't do or should be aware of and try to stop doing?
Yeah, I did want to mention, I'm glad you asked. There are some things that kids say that feel unspeakable. Feels like they should not say these things. So some of those things are like, I hate you, mommy, or I hate my sibling. That's one that came up in coaching this week. Green beans are poopy. Like any number of opinions that we feel like either the other person shouldn't have or at a minimum shouldn't express. That is a prime time for validation. Because in order to create the lesson that, hey, everybody doesn't actually need to hear everything that's in your head, we have to validate that those thoughts exist, because they do. And the opposite of validation, by the way, is shaming, right? So it's not, maybe it's invalidation, but shame is when we think we are bad for what we do or think or say. And so if we're not in the business of validating, again, and we can validate the emotion without endorsing the behavior. But I hate you, mom, is an expression of frustration, of aggravation. And those things are allowed. Okay. Now we can talk about how we talk to parents and all of that, but that's something else. That's a different side of the conversation. Wow, you are so aggravated right now. Now, how can we get that? How can we get you feeling better? You don't want the green beans? Great. Don't eat the green beans. You are feeling like you really hate green beans right now. Okay, fine. Right? It's like, it just diffuses the energy around it when we're not resisting what they're laying down. It's like, yeah, I get it. You hate the green beans. Fine.
I always get a kick out of these kinds of talking about these sorts of topics, whether it's parenting or teaching, or I guess even in any relationship. How much of the work is really on this side? You know what I mean? Like, why am I triggered that this bothers me? Why is my voice tone elevated? Why, you know what I mean? And you pointed out early on, you can't control anybody else. So really the only thing that you have to work on is yourself. And so it kind of shines a light on a lot of our own shortfalls, I guess.
It's such a bummer, though. Like, life would be so much easier if we could just control our children. But like, extrapolate that into their adulthood. Do we really want 45-year-old children who are still looking to us for what decisions to make or how to behave? We don't. I would argue that we don't. So let's teach them early who they are, what they like, what they don't like, how they feel, so that when they go into the world, they can manage themselves.
And just to reiterate, what you're describing is not giving in or giving up, and it's not absolving control or responsibility for the child. You still make the decisions, as you pointed out, that for safety or whatever that need to be made, but they also have the right not to be happy with those decisions and those controls. And that's like, I guess we're all like that in a way.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And there's tremendous freedom in understanding that. And again, it is complicated when it's your kid, right? Because there's other factors at work. But there's a lot of freedom in being like, yeah, you can totally be upset about the fact that you have an 11 o'clock curfew. Just jumping to the other end of the child rearing spectrum, right? You're allowed to be upset. And I, as your parent, really like and appreciate my reasons for having this curfew for you. And so, that's how it is right now. I'm not saying it's always going to be like that, but that's how it is right now. The end.
If much of the struggles that we have in validating others is because it's hard to validate ourselves, and maybe we feel shame, or we feel this sense that we're not the parent that we should be, or that we should hold this ground. Do you have any and this might be opening an entire another can of worms, but any quick tips for self-validating in the moment as you're bringing down your voice tone and you're relaxing your body and your reflective listening? Is there anything else that parents can tell themselves in the moment?
Yeah, I really like, and Dr. Becky Kennedy says this a lot, which is, I am a good parent having a hard time, and that is a good kid who's having a hard time. When we can get away from I'm bad, number one, or I'm doing something bad. Nobody's doing anything bad. Everybody's just trying their best with what they have. And, maybe we'll get some new tools and we'll do it better. Maybe we'll take a nap and we'll do it better. But I think, right, I'm a good parent having a hard time. But the other thing I want to say about that, Andrew, is lots of parents immediately shame and blame themselves for what their children are doing. And the fact of the matter is that some of those kids are having developmental complications. They're complicated kids who might need a little bit of therapy, who might need a modification in their environment. Maybe they're in the wrong school. And so parents immediately blame themselves for their child's, kind of extra behavior. When children are having meltdowns that last, more than a couple of minutes, when they're having those meltdowns frequently, when there are frequent battles, it's a sign that something is amiss. And we should get very curious about what that is, because behavior is the tip of the iceberg. It's what we see on the outside, but it not directly, but indirectly points to what's happening on the inside. And we would do well to pay attention to those signals.
Agreed, 100%. Yeah, from the world of evaluations, the neurodevelopmental factors, and other causes too, we differentiate them as can'ts versus won'ts. And if we assume all behavior is a won't and not a can't, and sometimes it's maybe a won't, but other times it's a can't, then we're lumping them all together. And there may be some other things that are going on that are really inhibiting that child from doing what they should, just for their own happiness and well-being.
That's right.
That line about I'm a good parent having a hard time is just wonderful. I think that's so perfect. I'm going to put that in the show notes. And I think that's a really great place to wrap up for today. But I wanted you to just talk very quickly about some of the other endeavors in which you're involved. One is Raising Orchid Kids. Just tell us about that.
Yeah, Raising Orchid Kids is an online parent education and support organization for parents who are raising neurosparkly, neurospicy, neurodifferent, however you want to refer to them, but kids who are having developmental challenges. We have an 8-week class that we run. We do workshops periodically. People come for community. They come for some education, and they really get good, solid information about why their kids are behaving the way they are. And that can be really life-changing. So that is, something that I just love doing.
And parents from all over the country can be part of that?
They can, yeah. And in fact, we have a class, I'm not sure when this is airing, but we have a class starting late January.
Okay. I will include the information about how to reach out about that and get in touch with you about that. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about, or just have you share about, is you're a podcast host. So that's so cool. You've done a bunch of podcasts, I think way more than we have. You host the Complicated Kids podcast. So is there anything you want to share about that?
Yeah, I would encourage people to take a listen. I have experts from all professional stripes. Sometimes I do a solo episode. And it's it is about how complicated child development really is. Because when things are going well, we don't notice that. It's only when, things are amiss and we're like, whoa, this is complex. So that's what the podcast is about.
And it's so great. All your titles and all the different experts that you've talked with, you have some fantastic information on there. And I was going through and listening to some of them, but anybody who's listening to this, I would highly encourage you to go listen to Gabrielle's podcast, the Complicated Kids podcast. Let's see. I think that's about it. Is there anything else that I forgot other than how listeners can reach you?
They can reach me at my website, gabrielenicolet.com. That's Gabrielle with one L and an E. And yeah, reach out. I'd love to talk. You can hear me. I love to talk.
You do. You have a great calming approach. You're so good at what you do, and you have so much awesome information and we only touched on the surface of your expertise. So if you'd ever like to come back on again, I don't think there's no end to what you could share about that I think would be just fantastic.
I will happily come back. You're a delight to talk to. I am quite enjoying the synergy between our approaches because it's very clear that there is lots. So thanks, Andrew.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
That's it from us today. As always, you can find more information as well as resources on our website, individualmatters.org. We hope you'll join us at the next podcast, where we'll continue to explore topics around successful living, learning and education, and child development, and share ways to help you live a more positive and fulfilling life.
The preceding information is not intended to provide or serve as medical, clinical, or educational advice. Individual Matters is not responsible for the accuracy of guest statements. All information should be validated independently. Please consult with your doctor, mental health provider, attorney, or other appropriate professionals before making any personal decisions for yourself or those in your care.